I knew something was wrong before anyone said a word. It wasn't the noise, that part was familiar. Family reunions were always loud, crowded, overflowing with voices that talked over each other as if silence were something to fear. Folding chairs lined the backyard, children ran between tables, and the smell of food hung heavy in the warm air. On the surface, it looked like comfort. Tradition. Belonging. But my mother wouldn't look at me. She moved from group to group with practiced grace, smiling, laughing softly, her hands busy straightening napkins that didn't need straightening. Every time our eyes nearly met, she turned away. I felt a quiet tightening in my chest, the kind I had learned not to question too quickly. Growing up, I had learned that discomfort often arrived long before explanations did. I stood near the drinks table, holding a paper cup I hadn't touched. People congratulated me on the business, my business. They said my name with admiration, pride, sometimes envy. I nodded politely, thanked them, downplayed everything. I always did. Success had taught me to shrink, not expand. In my family, standing out came with consequences. My father sat at the center table like a host presiding over something important. He laughed louder than usual, slapped shoulders, told stories that painted him as the steady hand behind every success. My brother stood beside him, relaxed, confident, his posture easy in a way mine never was. He hadn't worked in years, but no one seemed bothered by that. He had always been finding himself. I had been finding solutions. I told myself I was imagining things. That the tension I felt was leftover exhaustion from too many late nights, too many responsibilities carried quietly. I reminded myself that family gatherings had always made me feel like this, slightly off balance, slightly on guard. I was the one who listened, who adapted, who made room. Then my father cleared his throat. The sound cut cleanly through the air. Conversations faded, chairs shifted, forks paused midair. I felt 30 pairs of eyes move toward me before he even said my name. That was when my stomach dropped. I had learned to recognize that feeling, too, the moment right before something breaks. "We need everyone's attention," he said, smiling as if he were about to make a toast. My mother came to stand beside him. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, knuckles pale. She still didn't look at me. My father gestured in my direction. "This is about family," he continued. "About doing what's right for all of us." I felt suddenly very young, like the girl who used to wait at the window for praise that never came, who learned early that love could be conditional. I forced a small smile, the one I had practiced for years. The one that said I'm calm, I'm respectful, I belong here. "The business," he said, finally. "It's time we talked about the business." The word landed heavily between us. My business. The one I built quietly, without help, without applause. The one that grew from sleepless nights and careful risks. The one I never mentioned at family dinners because it made people uncomfortable. My mother finally spoke. Her voice was gentle, almost tender. "You've always been strong," she said. "Responsible. You can handle more than most." That was when I understood. This wasn't concern. It was preparation. And for the first time, standing there among people who shared my last name, I felt completely alone. No one asked me how I felt. That was the first thing I noticed once my father finished speaking. There was no pause, no invitation for my voice to enter the moment. It was as if my role had already been decided, and my presence was simply a formality. The air felt heavier, thicker, like everyone was holding their breath and waiting for me to comply. My father reached for a folder beneath the table and placed it in front of him with deliberate care. The sound of it touching the wood was small, but it echoed inside my chest. He didn't slide it toward me yet. He wanted the moment to linger. "We've been thinking about this for a long time," he said. "Your brother needs stability. Direction. You've always managed on your own." The words sounded almost like praise. Almost. My mother nodded beside him. "You're capable," she added softly. "You don't need the business the way he does." I looked at her then, really looked. There was something careful in her expression, something guarded. She was choosing her words the way people do when they know the truth might hurt but say it anyway because it's convenient. My brother finally spoke. "It's not like I'd take it away from you completely," he said, shrugging lightly. "It would still be family." Family. The word felt thin in his mouth. I glanced around at the faces watching us. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people who had known me my entire life. Some looked uncomfortable. Some looked curious. A few looked approving, as if sacrifice were a virtue when it belonged to someone else. That was when my father slid the folder across the table toward me. Inside were documents. Signatures waiting for my name. Lines drawn neatly, legally, as if something so personal could be reduced to paper and ink. "We think it's best if you sign today," he said. "No need to drag this out. Today. In front of everyone." My chest tightened, not with anger, but with something deeper and more painful, recognition. I saw, all at once, the pattern I had ignored for years. How my responsibility had always been expected, never thanked. How my brother's needs were always urgent, while mine were assumed to be endless. I opened my mouth to speak, then closed it again. Silence settled around me, thick and uncomfortable. I could feel eyes searching my face for a reaction, tears, protest, gratitude, anything that would make sense of this moment. I felt none of those things. Only a quiet, aching disappointment. I realized then that this question was never meant to be answered honestly. It was designed to corner me. To make refusal look selfish. To make obedience look loving. I stood up slowly. The movement alone drew whispers. My father frowned slightly, confusion flickering across his face. "Where are you going?" he asked. I didn't answer. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. My hands trembled just enough for me to notice, but my voice, when I spoke into it, was calm. Almost steady. "I need you here," I said. "Now." I ended the call and returned to my seat. No explanations. No arguments. My parents exchanged looks, irritation beginning to replace confidence. My brother leaned back, arms crossed, as if this were a delay, nothing more. But something had shifted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to convince them of my worth. I wasn't pleading for understanding. I was simply waiting. And in that waiting, I felt something unfamiliar take root. Clarity. 30 minutes felt longer than it was. Each second passed with a new weight. Conversations tried to restart but failed. Laughter sounded forced. My father tapped his fingers against the table. Then the door opened. And everything they thought they knew about me began to change. The woman who entered didn't raise her voice or rush the moment. She paused just inside the doorway, allowing the room to notice her without demanding attention. She was dressed simply, professionally, and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need permission to be there. The conversations that had struggled to restart fell away again, one by one, until only the low hum of uncertainty remained. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said calmly. "But we need to talk." Her eyes moved across the room briefly, then settled on me. Not my father. Not my brother. Me. Something in my chest loosened. Just slightly. My father stood up immediately, his expression tightening into practiced authority. "And you are?" he asked, his tone polite but edged. The woman introduced herself and explained why she was there, choosing her words carefully. She spoke about documentation, consent, and boundaries, about how certain decisions required the full, willing agreement of the person involved. About how assumptions, no matter how long they'd gone unquestioned, didn't replace truth. She never used my name more than necessary. She didn't accuse or shame. She simply stated facts. I watched my parents' faces change as understanding crept in slowly. Not panic. Not fear. Something closer to disbelief. As if the ground beneath them had shifted without warning. My brother laughed once, nervously. "This is just a misunderstanding," he said. "We're family." The woman nodded slightly. "That's often when misunderstandings happen," she replied. The room felt different now. Smaller. More honest. I remained seated, hands folded in my lap. I didn't interrupt. I didn't explain my side. For once, I didn't feel the need to translate myself into something easier for them to accept. I realized then how exhausting it had been to always speak first, to soften truths, to carry emotional weight so others wouldn't have to. Silence, I was learning, wasn't emptiness. It was space. The woman turned to me. "Would you like to say anything?" Every eye returned to my face. For a moment, I considered it. I thought about all the things I could say, the late nights, the sacrifices, the quiet pride. I thought about how many times I had stepped back so someone else could step forward. But I shook my head gently. "No," I said. "I think everything important has already been said." My mother's eyes filled with something that looked like regret. Or maybe it was realization. It was hard to tell the difference from where I sat. My father's shoulders stiffened. He looked smaller somehow, less certain. Authority had always been his language. Now it was failing him. The woman gathered her things, her presence no longer necessary. "If there are no further questions," she said, "I'll leave you to your evening." She gave me a brief nod before turning toward the door. No applause followed. No dramatic confrontation. Just a quiet, collective understanding that something had changed and couldn't be undone. The party didn't end, but it never recovered. I stayed for a few more minutes, long enough to collect my bag, long enough to let the moment settle. My brother avoided my eyes. My parents didn't stop me as I stood. As I walked away, I felt lighter, not because I had won anything, but because I had finally stopped losing myself. Silence, I understood now, wasn't weakness. It was the sound of choosing myself for the first time. I left before dessert was served. There was no announcement, no dramatic pause meant to draw attention to my exit. I simply picked up my bag, nodded politely to a few familiar faces, and walked toward the door. The night air outside felt cooler, steadier, as if it were offering me space to breathe after holding my breath for far too long. No one followed me. That realization hurt more than I expected, but it also clarified everything. For years, I had mistaken proximity for care, tradition for loyalty. I had believed that if I just remained patient enough, useful enough, they would eventually choose me the way I had chosen them. The drive home was quiet. Streetlights passed like soft punctuation marks, giving shape to thoughts I had avoided. I didn't feel angry. Anger would have been easier. What I felt instead was a gentle sadness, the kind that comes with understanding something too late to change it, but just in time to stop repeating it. The days that followed were quieter than I imagined. My phone didn't ring the next morning. Or the one after that. When it finally did, the conversations were careful. Short. Polite. My parents spoke as if we were all learning a new language, one that required pauses and restraint. They didn't apologize, not directly, but they stopped asking. Stopped assuming. That, I realized, was the beginning of respect. My brother didn't reach out at all. At first, that absence stung. Then it settled into something else, acceptance. I could finally admit that my role in his life had never been sister, it had been support system. And support systems, I was learning, are often invisible until they are removed. Weeks passed. The business continued. Quietly. Strongly. I returned to my routines, to the work that grounded me, to the choices that reminded me who I was when no one was watching. I slept better. I spoke more honestly, with myself most of all. One afternoon, my mother invited me to coffee. Just the two of us. She didn't defend herself. She didn't explain away the past. She simply said, "I didn't realize how much we asked of you." It wasn't everything I deserved, but it was something real. I nodded, and for the first time, I didn't rush to make her feel better. I let the silence do its work. What surprised me most was the peace. I hadn't taken anything from them. I hadn't embarrassed anyone or proved anyone wrong in front of an audience. I had simply stepped back, and in doing so, I had changed the balance. Boundaries, I learned, don't need to be loud to be effective. They just need to be firm. Now, when I think of that reunion, I don't replay it with bitterness. I remember the moment I stood up. The call I made. The choice I didn't explain. Some doors close with noise. Others close with grace. I chose the quiet one. And in that quiet, I found something I had been searching for all along, not approval, not validation, but self-respect. A steady, unshakable knowing that my worth doesn't depend on how much I give away. That was the real inheritance. And it was finally mine.